10 months into a killing spree, the city of New Orleans was in massive turmoil, not knowing when the Axeman of New Orleans would act again. Newspapers were selling out stories about him. Police failed to locate credible suspects for his true identity, and the people were all terrified that the next victim would be them. On March 13th, 1919, a man claiming to be that killer sent a letter that was published in many newspapers in the area, saying that he would kill again that night, but since he really enjoyed jazz, he would spare any house that was playing the soulful music during the night. Citizens scrambled in fear, blaring out the music late into the night, all fearful that if they didn't, they would be next on his list. The following morning, the city regrouped and found that no one had died, seemingly because the killer hadn't encountered a home not playing jazz. Breathing a collective sigh of relief, the city now had even more questions to ask as to what they could do to protect themselves from the Axemen of New Orleans and for how long that they would need to do so. Here we have one of the most compelling mysteries of history in the murder sprees committed by the unknown perpetrator, popularly known as the Axeman of New Orleans, which we'll be discussing tonight on Friday Night Frights. I'm your host, Christian Ashley of Systematic Ecology, here to terrify and instruct you all on the weird, unusual, fascinating, fantastical, and unexplainable things that may or may not lurk out there in the world. I am joined by my co-host, Joe Day. How's it going, Joe?
Good. I'm glad that we are. I'm glad that we're back at it.
Yeah. So you may have noticed again there was a schedule slip. We were supposed to do this last month, and well, I forgot. Uh, that's really on me. A lot of it. I am in the midst of sending out resumes and interviewing with churches to try and find a job somewhere. And in the midst of all this slipped through the cracks. So Joe texted me last month. Are we doing this? I was like, no, not this month. We're going to wait a month. So thank you all for your patience. I really appreciate that. So just as a reminder, I do want to say that our schedule is to allegedly once a month cover one of six categories. Those being cryptozoology, the paranormal, religious strangeness, the weird and the unexplained, true crime, which we're doing this month, and ufology. This episode in particular was voted on by our Systematic Ecology fans on the Priest of the Geeks page on Facebook. So if you would like to have a say in our next topic, then please head over there and join. So Joe, the Axeman of New Orleans, we talked a little bit before recording, but I want to hear like what your history exploring this topic and why it started today.
Yeah. I mean, it started when this won the poll. Yeah, I had never heard of this one before. I feel like when I was looking into this, I feel like at some point along the way I had heard something about like a ghost story that was riffed off of this or something like that, like a ghost that wouldn't strike your house if you were playing jazz or something like that. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, it's the perfect recipe for something to live on in infamy when you consider the the timetable in which this happens, at a point where information is not disseminated at the rate that it would be, even without saying something like before computers, but like even before like household TVs and household, you know what I mean, like you're talking about
Yeah.
newspapers and word of mouth. And when you have an unknown killer and striking seemingly from the shadows, especially at a time where there's a lot of turmoil, it's bound to have a litany of um myths around it and theories and different things like that. So it was an interesting dive down a rabbit hole, but it was only a rabbit hole that started in preparation for this.
And that's fair. It's not, I mean, it's a fairly well known case in the true crime circles, but that's if you're in the circles. I don't expect most people to have heard of it. Um, my introduction was actually the last podcast on the last episode that they did. They covered a little bit of this and some others on one of their unsolved cases. And it's like, oh, wow, this is pretty interesting. And yeah, all the things that are going in here for why we don't know who the killer is. I mean, the time period, forensics not being what they are these days, misinformation, racial prejudices, and just some police incompetency, some of it being doing their job, and it's all over the place. Uh, so it's a very fun like story at the same time. This is also a horrific event that happened in history and took the lives of several people who did nothing to deserve what was happening to them. So there's that part of it that appeals to me, and that there's an answer, but can we ever actually find that answer on this side of eternity? The same way, like with the Jack the Ripper case that I've already covered here on the show. It's like we can test all the DNA that we want to. I mean, at the end of the day, we weren't there at Whitechapel when it was happening. We weren't there, in New Orleans when this is happening in the 1910s. So there's an answer, and that's something someone perpetrated these events, but finding the actual one, it's going to be difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you say we just get into this bad boy? Starting off with our setting here. Once again, this is New Orleans in the midst of World War One. 1918 is where we start, although some people would push back and say it should actually start in 1911, 1912. I'm not going to focus too much on those, but there is some evidence that suggests that the killer here actually started a little bit earlier, but no one knows. So these are what are known, like much like in the Jack the Ripper case, as like the canonical murders and assaults. So we're going to start off with Joseph and Catherine, excuse me, Maggio. This takes place on May 23rd, 1918. Now, Joseph himself was a grocer in the community, and you're going to hear the word grocer several times in this story. So it got to the point where I'm doing my research, like, does this guy have a vendetta against grocers? Did like one deny him a job or something? It's just one of those things where you try and make something out of nothing, which is always very difficult in a criminal case. So he and his wife were murdered by a straight razor as they slept. There didn't seem to be a sign of a struggle or anything. Then post mortem, they were struck with an axe. Um, and depending on which case we're dealing with, the killer may have brought it himself. He may have used something that they have on hand and used their own axe against them. I think this was one when he brought him himself. He himself then leaves a message supposedly that states that Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony. And this is one of those things that people believe may point to this being not the first murder, but one that started in 1911, 1912. There was another woman um, who could have been said, I can't remember the actual names, I forgot to write it down, but the husband's name was Anthony, I think, and I think this is kind of maybe a pun on that. No one knows for sure. And without actually talking to the actual killer himself, no one knows. So that's where they were left. The police investigated the scene, found that no valuables had been stolen, and they ruled out theft as a motive. And in fact, in all these crimes, there's only one time I can think of where the killer seemed to take something, and that was like $6 out of a wallet. So the razor itself belonged to Joseph's brother Andrew, who was a barber, which is a pretty good reason to have a razor like that. And he lived adjacent to them in the apartments that were kind of very close together. And he had said at work that day, one of his coworkers told the cops that he needed to take that blade back with him home so he could go and hone it because there was a nick in it. Now, at the time of the murders, he himself claims to have been drunk and did not hear anything from his brother's apartment, even though they were beside each other, which sometimes when you're just that drunk, you're not going to be able to hear anything. So that's one reason why he looked like a suspect and not a suspect at the same time. So immediately he became the top suspect. But the police then released him later on when no further evidence came. Is there anything to say to that before we move on?
Um, yeah, I mean, the so far this sounds like a parody of Sweeney Todd. I just had to look up when Sweeney Todd was first published because this sounds like the thing that inspired Sweeney Todd, but Sweeney Todd came out in 1946 or 1846 for the first time, so not that. Yeah, I mean this this sounds like the makings for a prototypical, you know, serial killer of the time.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And that term isn't really around at this point in time in history because that's something that would be
Yeah.
developed way later on. As we started studying criminals a little bit more, as criminals got access to different ways to harm people, and we just actually had agencies actually doing the novel thing of working together to share information with each other, that it started to become a more popularized term. So like people knew it was possible, for a singular person to kill more than one person, but that term doesn't really get uh, evolved, created until way later on.
I'm curious what the thought process was of the time because psychology um, was around, but not developed in the way that we would know it today. But like the psych part of me and what I do is fascinated by a person who does the deed and then desecrates the body post mortem. Like
Yes.
that shows almost a personal nature to it, though. um Not to get ahead, but I think the profile as a whole showcases somebody who's displaying angry or deviant behavior overall, rather than this being
Mhm.
hyper personal to the actual victims that were targeted.
I should say real quick, I should have said this at the very, very beginning. This is, of course, a real case with actual murders. So we're going to get into some of the nitty gritty, not everything. What is the goal of this is not to gross you out. The goal of this is not to like say, oh, and then the murderer did this and he slipped this in, and like, oh, look at the blood flowing. It's like the point being is like we have to describe some of the case. So if you're squeamish about this, probably go to the next episode. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
If I'd been better, I'd have said that
but
earlier. But you
but
raised a
that's
good point.
but I can tell you, I can tell you all that are listening to this, as somebody who, so I guess I should tip my hand a little bit, even though I don't, I'm not familiar with this case. I cut my teeth broadcasting and podcasting with a group called the Innocence Project, which basically takes wrongfully convicted cases and revisits them. And I was working with a podcast that did exactly that. They'd take a case and basically re-examine the evidence, and with the idea that, like, if you were around at this time and you were living in this area, trying to like crowdsource information and different things like that. So that's part of the reason why I'm not like super gun ho into the world of true crime, is because when you've worked personally with an organization on these cases, it's kind of hard to look at it theoretically. Um,
Mhm.
so for me, I look at this through the lens of, even if we are looking through the lens of antiquity, and there's no real way that we're going to find the proverbial smoking gun, the goal is still to treat the victims with respect, even if it's through the lens of antiquity. So we're not going for anybody who's worried about this kind of thing, the 87th My Favorite Murder podcast. That's not what this is. This is a look historically at something that happened and offering any kind of insight or thought process or something along those lines if anything, even if we weren't able to find something, wonderfully insightful or incredibly profound, um, to tell the stories of the victims, to let their stories be heard on a different platform.
Yeah. Well said. And to go back to something you mentioned earlier, it's like, what would people think of someone like this at the time? More often than not, probably the idea would be like, oh, this is just an insane person or someone who's mentally unwell and they should be locked up, or would be like the most prevalent idea among people because, once again, as we were starting to understand more certain parts of human psychology as that was developing in its own field. Yeah, people had done it in the past, but it was becoming more prominent. Dispelling older ideas of they should just be in an asylum or in jail or what have you was probably what most people were expecting here. It's like when people are buying the newspapers they are, they're like being sensationalized, be like, oh, there's this lunatic out there who's doing these things. There's no one with no rational person with a brain would actually be perpetrating something like this. I mean, not that's not wholly across the board, but most people would think that way.
Yeah, yeah. There's a reason why. For anybody who's ever heard of the sanity plea, there's a reason why it's framed that way. Is because it was all very black and white when you're talking about the first stages of what would become any kind of look into mental health or mental wellness or evaluating if somebody was fit to stand trial or something along those lines. We're talking in the early 1900s, the 19 teens at this point. We're still talking about people are getting lobotomized with chisels. Like we're still talking about essentially the Stone Ages as far as this sort of thing goes. In a lot of ways, I don't know, this that conversation, though the truly graphically inhumane stuff was outlawed quite a few years ago, in the realm of intelligent conversation about it, at a deviance level, you're talking about 20, 30 years at the very most if you want to be charitable, as far
Yeah.
as when folks stop just getting painted with the brush of, oh, you're a Looney Tune, oh, you're out of your mind, you're insane, all of those kinds of things. And you're right, at a very cold and honest historical level, that is probably exactly what folks thought. Is he's just a person out of their mind and all of that sort of stuff. But it's just one of those cases that you hear about the behavior and it's not typical. Like,
Mhm.
generally, the desecration portion of it is something that signifies some kind of deeper connection. And from what and I think if there are pieces of connective tissue, I am sure, as you lead us through tonight's episode, and you being more well versed in this, it will start to flesh out more and things like that. But short of maybe some commonality that could very easily be attributed to the time and the area that was being targeted. um it's there's one of the weird things about this one is generally you can point something out and through the lens of antiquity say, man, seems pretty evident that this person was doing X, Y, or Z, and all of that. um I would argue that with this one, it's maybe not that black and white.
Yeah. And this is also assuming that every case we're going to be covering tonight is actually the same person behind it,
Yeah,
which
that's a
th-
good point.
th- there's a reason we typically do, and I do think these are connected, but I'm also not I'm not a policeman or an FBI agent or what have you. That's not my forte. But just from my little armchair looking at this, they look connected to me. And it looks like there's a purpose behind this. And this being driven by someone, I don't know if cold and calculated would not be what I'd use, but like an opportunistic They know what they're doing. They have a goal in mind, and these people taking care of them in their own way is how they kind of flesh that out. And there are many debates on who the actual killer is as far as like personality wise. It's going to be difficult when you don't know who it actually is. So, my point of view may be completely and utterly wrong. It may be a different way. I don't know. I can't prove it either way. So, I'm going to go with what I think, and I'm going to try and justify that. So, we shall see as we move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Next up, we have Louis Bessumer. Some of these names I'm going to butcher, by the way, so just have fun with that. And Harriet Lowe. This occurs on June 27th, 1918, early in the morning. Another grocer, our word of the week, of the month. Louis was with his mistress, Harriet, and they were both attacked, like I said, in the early morning by an unknown assailant who took one of Louis's axes to wound both, leaving Harriet's face paralyzed on one side, but neither dead. This is thankfully one where the victims were able to survive, and not as well as they did before, but at least they were able to live. These two were then discovered by a delivery driver and their lives preserved by the medical science of the time. Unfortunately, though, her mental state was put into question during interrogation and discounted. And once again, no valuables were taken in the attack, which Louis said occurred while he was sleeping. So that's something that also seems to be a pattern here. Is most of the time our killer here goes after people who are vulnerable and not able to fight back, whether that be because he himself is not physically fit or it's just smarter to do it that way. There's speculation. Most people tend to describe him later on as a bigger man um, of varying ethnicities. So we shall see. Now, the police come in, investigate the scene, and they look at this African American worker that they had just hired, Louis Obicon, Oubicon, and arrested him based on hearsay and definitely racially charged sentiments of the time. And he was eventually released when no further evidence came. Now, Harriet Lowe, and this is her words, not mine, described the assailant as a mulatto. If you're somehow not know what that means, half white, half black, or depending on where you are in the world, a mixed race is the easiest way to put that. She claimed that this person did the deed, but once again, because of her adult state of mind, and of course, a female victim, police disregarded her statements. I think the word hysteria was actually used in one of the documents.
Yeah.
So typical of the time. So, in an interesting bit of history, these two characters kind of leave the story here, then go on the little side quest of merriment, where she would later accuse Bessumer of being a German spy. Remember where we are right now, uh, World War One, and she would later be attacked, murdered, and before she died, she named her murderer as him, leading him to be arrested and jailed. But he was later acquitted 9 months later due to lack of evidence. So has next to nothing to do, more than likely, with the rest of the story, but I just found it interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the realities of something like this is um uh, incompetence and personal leanings a lot of the time stunted good police work during this period of time.
Most definitely. That's something that most writers, when they're looking at this, they're gonna call that out. Um, and to be fair, to an extent, to them, no one's prepared for this. In the same way, yeah, they're supposed to investigate murders and stuff, but like the idea of a serial killer, that's not in their brains. Looking for more evidence than that is not something they're like trained for as well. That does then not excuse certain decisions that are made, knee jerk reactions that are made to put in people on the lower ends of society as main suspects just because they fit the idea of a profile versus actually, fitting the crime. But just so you understand the times that we're in, the forensics of the time, they're good for the time, but They simply aren't as good as we have it now. We are living in a very good age for that, and yet even now we have plenty of murders and assaults and so on and so forth not get found out. So I'm still glad we live where we do, but the solvability of a case is far different now than it was then.
Yeah.
Now, next up on our list, we have Anna Schneider. These occur on August 5th, 1918. She herself, and I will throw another warning in here for everyone, she is 8 months pregnant at the time, woke up to find a figure shrouded in shadow in the middle of the night, and she herself was repeatedly beaten and bashed in the face, causing her scalp to open, covering her face with blood, leaving her seemingly dead. The assailant left, and her husband, Ed, who had been working a little later, then found her after midnight and went to get care for her. Providentially, they were able to save not only her, but also the baby girl who lived to be very healthy. It was born just 2 days later. But unfortunately, as a result of the trauma from the experience, she was unable to remember her attacker. Now, this is the case I was talking about earlier, where $6 was taken from Ed's wallet, but nothing else, which is atypical of the other cases. And that's assuming they didn't notice something else going missing. So maybe the killer at this point in time was actually thinking I should make it look like a robbery or something like that, or they saw an opportunity. No one knows once again because we don't know who did it. Now, at this time, James Gleason, an ex con, was arrested for this crime, but also, like everyone before now, was eventually released without evidence to support his involvement.
Yeah, this one seems to be the one that if there's an argument to be made for one of them not being actually perpetrated by the same person, that this one would be it.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, this is more. They speculate that the lamp by her bed, if I'm remembering correctly, is what was used to attack her. So it doesn't fit the idea of using other weapons for it. Maybe he simply didn't have an axe on his person at this time and just used whatever was nearby, or maybe this is something completely unrelated to the actual cases. This one is one of the weakest. I'll grant you that. So yeah, that's where we're at. Then we have Joseph Romano. This occurs August 10th, 1918. Now, in the middle of the night, two sisters who lived with their uncle nearby, Pauline and Mary, went to go see what was happening to Uncle Bruno and discovered, excuse me, no, Mary Bruno is their surname. Uh, their Uncle Joseph had suffered a head blow, and the assailant was running away at that same time. That it's believed that their calling out and then heading up that way startled the killer enough for him to escape. They described the man himself as a dark skinned man who was overweight and wore a dark colored suit and hat. Now, Joseph unfortunately would die. He actually walked to uh, the doctor, if I'm remembering correctly, and then unfortunately just died 2 days later of his wounds. So he was not fine, but fine enough to walk, but not fine enough to continue living. To believe there was some internal bleeding and stuff like that. Just caused too much of an issue, and I think infection may have been a cause too, especially at this time in history. Now the house itself was rummaged through, things burned apart, ransacked for a bit, but nothing was stolen in this crime, and they found an axe nearby at the crime scene. Now, it is at this time the public really starts to act up because they're noticing that these things are being linked, these killings, these attacks and assaults. And as is always the case, the papers ran wild with it because, as per usual, if it bleeds, it leads. And just goes to show you that there's no sudden growth in true crime. People have always been fascinated by it, and some people do it very poorly. Now, the police had no immediate suspects here, but at the time they listened to a retired detective named John D'Antonio, who claimed that this killer may be linked to the attacks that happened, like I mentioned, in 1911 and 1912. These were for different Italian families there. Not going too much in depth, and John claimed that the killer, in his point of view, was a classic Jekyll and Hyde case. And the general idea being he thought it was someone who was able to act normally by day, which was atypical of the time, and then at night suddenly morphed into his like Hyde persona to carry out these killings. Which, by the way, um, I rewatched the four films made from like 1910ish to 1940 something, and you know what? It's supposed to be a twist that Jekyll and Hyde are, are the same guy, but the movies don't have it that way. And it's like, oh, I guess it was just that much in the public consciousness that they decided just to go with it.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah,
I mean, there is a world where this is somebody who, in every other way, is able to fit into normative society. So that makes sense.
yeah, that's one of the one of the leading ideas that before we actually get into actual suspects is that this is someone who was able to blend in as per usual, like would look no different than you and I, and then at night just gave in to their baser urges, where they could be, their real self, as it were. Um, Once again, can't tell you either way because we don't know who it was, but it sounds probable enough to me to be believable. Now, as far as the descriptions go, as we've discussed on other shows, eyewitness accounts, whether it be seeing Nessie or a killer or what have you, they're not always the most reliable things on earth. And we tend to place a lot of importance on them, especially when we're talking about ourselves, because it's what we saw. Now, unfortunately, in the midst of the madness going on, it being in the dead of night as well, it's very easy to see a feature and think it's true, but it's because of the shading and the lack of light around you that you think, well, his skin color was this, or it was definitely a man, or it was definitely a woman. He was overweight. He was underweight. Like most of the eyewitness accounts do give someone who seemed to be of either African American or mixed race. Um, ancestry and was probably tall, maybe overweight. That's about as good as it gets. Because once
Yep.
again, recall how these people are seeing it under very traumatic circumstances in the middle of the night. It's really hard to actually identify them in a time where you've got some light because we conquered a little bit, but we don't have what we have now.
Yeah, there's a reason why there's been a lot of pushback in the last stretch of time um, against relying on um, things like sketch artists, relying on things like lineups, relying on things that require recall. Because the idea is that it is the memory already starts to degrade like moments after the event happens. Then you add in the fact that if it's dark outside, or if light is in any way hampered or dimmed, and you have somebody who has a tan, well, at this point in time, that's going to fall on, you know, that being a person of mixed race. Could it be, again, to use your line? I wasn't there. Like, I'm not saying it's 100% impossible, but if you're talking about an incredibly racist part of human history, you have to call a spade a spade. And
Yes.
so, but even outside of the prejudice aspect of it, high intensity situations really affect and degrade um core memories. And that whole idea of who this was and describing this person, um, it's just one of those things that unfortunately you've gotta treat with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when we do get to our suspects, it's it's going to be difficult to actually narrow it down because some of them don't describe aren't described by eyewitness accounts as being someone you would think it would be. Others, once again, in a very racially charged time, in a very racist part of America, in a country that was racist for the most part. And I'm saying every American ever was racist, but if you say it wasn't happening here, you don't know your history and you're not taking care of the people who suffered under it. So that's something to keep in mind here as we're going on. It's like they think they saw this. Maybe they're predisposed to think it may have been someone like this, or maybe they want it to be someone like this, or it could just be they thought they saw something and that's the end of it. We don't know. We don't have what we would have hopefully more now with people actually asking them better questions, uh, giving more time to these cases. They kind of just wanted to solve it. And unfortunately, as is about to be revealed, it's 10 months in for our next part of the case, where we see a family, Charles, Rosie, and Mary Cortamiglia. And once again, a little warning for what's about to happen here. This occurs on the 9th of March 10th, 1919. All three were attacked in the night in the suburbs of New Orleans. So this is still considered to be part of New Orleans proper, but is a suburb that would have its own separate name. Now, hearing screams, a passing grocer, uh, Yorlando, it's I then Orlando. I have no clue how you're supposed to pronounce that. So I'm going to say Yorlando. Yorlando Giordano came to investigate and found Charles and Rosie with wounds suffered from the axe attack. And unfortunately, the baby Mary was dead in her mother's arms, having suffered a backward neck blow. Um, Once again, in this case, no items were stolen during the murder, during the assault. Now, this is where the story gets even worse. Rosie claimed that the attacks were done by Orlando and his son Frank, which her husband Charles vehemently denied, even after they tried and sentenced them for murder soon after of the death of their child. The entire time he had nothing but good things to say about them, but she in her kept saying it was them. And if they had actually done their work, they would have known more than likely it wasn't either one of them because Yolanda was far too old and frail and weak to have had the strength to commit the attacks. And Frank himself was too large to have entered the home the same way the killer had done. If I'm remembering correctly, there was just a slit large enough for not a small person, but someone of about average build to get inside. And that was most definitely not Frank's frame. Now, as this is going on, Charles actually divorces his wife because of this, amongst some other things. And later on, she would admit that she had made up the charges because she was jealous of Orlando's success with his family and that he had a surviving son. And the two were later released. So they served prison time, but they were later acquitted of the charges.
Yeah.
Now, yeah,
Yeah, this is one of those that yeah, this is where I think you have to consider that at some point with some of these cases the lore becomes so big that it distracts from the reality that there's a not zero chance that these attacks weren't actually as connected or as thought out or as calculated. It just there's all of these little things that distract from it, and so you're left with just this lore and myth that ends up becoming something other than what was.
absolutely. And if you recall to the opening of the show we've done, I mentioned, you know, a letter being sent out, a proclamation sent supposedly by the killer himself. And I will read that letter. This was sent to several newspapers. This is sent from hell, believe it or not. Hell on the date of our year of our Lord, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal, they have never caught me and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. This is based on the old debunked idea of the ether being in the sky, the heavens and the space and all that mess. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, be smeared with blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but his satanic majesty, Francis Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there is any need of such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me as they have in the past. They are wise and know to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as a most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I'm in close relationship with the angel of death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, that it may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or realm of the fantasy, the X-Man.
For kids, it's called showmanship. Um, that is somebody who um either fundamentally understands that they have been one foot in front of police and law enforcement and all of that sort of stuff and understands the limitations of the time, or it is somebody who is capitalizing on the hysteria of the time, the mass panic of the time, and wants to create more chaos. And that's where, like, part of this, and I know some of where you're going to go as far as potentials and all of that sort of stuff, but to me, all of this screams of somebody who's just trying to create chaos. um One thing I found interesting in looking up the letter, so for anybody who doesn't know, um generally speaking, in its earliest roots, blues and jazz um, was considered African American music, um, because of where it comes from, because of the history of all of that, and all of the many many offshoots that come off of the tree that is blues and its direct descendant, jazz. Um, there are theories that this is somebody who is trying to blame a person of color, trying to make people believe that it is a person of color that's perpetuating the crimes, um, because of the level of showmanship that is being displayed, because of how bombastic it is, and their use of the phrase devil. I think it's interesting. I'm not casting my lot in that particular camp or anything like that, because as you're going to hear once we get there, I'm going to have more opinions about who I don't think it was rather than who I think it was. Um, but it is certainly something to consider, and I think this is where and it is worth noting, this is not the first person who's done something like this, who's made a public spectacle at the cost of the at making the cops look like idiots because of their grand spectacle and all of that. It's not the first time. So, but I do think it is interesting to look at the brazen nature of the person who either did or was capitalizing on the murders.
And this is where we get some more parallels to the Jack the Ripper case. If you recall what I covered there a while back, there's the From Hell letter that allegedly was sent by the killer. Um, there's the idea of blaming another racial group where, there's that line is like the Jews are the one who shall do no suffer no wrong or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. That was in the Ripper case. Now replace Jew with African American here by proxy, given, like Joe said, this is, if you were really into jazz as far as like creating it, chances were you were an African American. So there's aspersions sent all over the place. Is this actually an African American who's targeting white people? Is this someone trying to make it look like an African American doing this? So it FOMO fosters racial strife. Foments, I think is the word I was looking for. And we simply don't know. And what I can tell from this letter, if this is a killer, which there's a huge debate, and rightly so, whether it actually is, if this is just an opportunist, trying to screw with people for fun and create that chaos you were talking about, or if this is actually the killer himself and writing this to mess with people. Does he actually legitimately think this way, or is he just doing that to throw suspicion off of them? Unknown. But they seem to be well educated. Uh, Not only in general, but in spiritual matters. They know their target audience. The vast majority of the people they're talking to would say that they were Christian. So by proclaiming themselves to be like this emissary of hell, as it were, and working for those forces, they're actively putting themselves against the vast majority of the people in that city. And that could be done for racial reasons, religious reasons. It could be done just because they thought it was funny. Or maybe they have something against Catholics, which will be part of the Italian side of things. We're getting it out a little bit down the road. If this is the killer, I think they're doing it to screw with people in the sense of there's nothing you can do to stop me. I'm way smarter than you. Much in a way, if the same thing from the From Hell letter and so on and so forth, Jack the Ripper, if he wrote it, was trying to say, look, you can do whatever you want. You're not finding me. But the other option is that this is indeed someone who capitalizes on the case and wants to mess with people. And you get that with a ton of murder cases across the board where people will call in and claim to be the murderer, even though they have were like 500 miles away from the situation, simply so that they can get their name out there, or simply so that they can like they can tell people like I'm the one that wrote that letter or something like that, just for the sake of 5 seconds of fame. So
Yeah.
I think I go with this actually being the killer, but I can't prove it.
I'm surprised more religious conversation wasn't taking place because you're talking about New Orleans, and that is classically a spot very well known for like pagan practices and a lot of different um spiritual practices and different things like that, that it was surprising to me that that wasn't an incredibly dominant part of the conversation, especially when you consider that beyond just like generally when people think about this part of this part of the country, you think of things like voodoo, but there's also hoodoo. There's also ancestor worship. There's also like there are
Santeria.
yeah, there are many different forms of practice that are popular during this time, well practiced at this time. Um, and especially given the racial component, I'm surprised that those didn't come up more.
Yeah, from what I looked up, and I had not exhaustively looked over everything, I don't remember it coming up that often, other than the fact that, historically, New Orleans was founded by French Catholics, and then later on, you have immigrants from Italy who would typically be Catholic. So this is gonna be the majority, denomination, as it were, in that area. But then, yeah, very few people I saw mentioned Fadoon, and I've heard it's supposed to. I, I've heard 50 different ways whether it's supposed to actually be Vadoon, that's the more proper way of talking about it, or if voodoo would be like the American way of looking at it. I don't know. I'm not an expert, so my apologies there. Santeria as well, like mixing in with local practices, coming from the parts of Africa where most of these people, yep, taken in the slave trade would have come from. And then, of course, from Haiti and the Dominican Republic as well. It was a huge part of there, and there would be some immigrants who came that way. But as far as I'm aware, it's on the police side of things, it would never really came up that much, if at all.
Right. Right.
I'm actually kind of surprised it didn't start a satanic panic, because he's quite blatant, the letter writer in where he stands.
Yeah, yeah, he's using what would be considered Judeo-Christian imagery when considering it, though if you're talking about somebody who's painting in broad strokes, you could make an argument that it is somebody who is speaking from more of a general spiritual perspective and not just Judeo-Christian, but um it's certainly using a lot of that verbiage that it could very easily be portrayed in that way.
Yeah. So that takes us to our next victim, uh, Steve Boca. This occurs on August 10th, 1919. Notice that there's a huge gap of time there, in between everything that has occurred. So for Steve, another grocer, imagine that, he was attacked in his sleep by an assailant wielding an axe. Very in character so far. And after the struggle, he regained consciousness for a bit and ran for help. And I went to a neighbor, if I'm remembering correctly, discovering that his head was indeed cracked open from the assault. That neighbor then gave him some treatment. He recovered, but he had no memory of the attack. And that's something that also shows up a lot. Is due to massive head trauma, some of these people, even if they survive, which thank God that they do, they don't remember anything because of the
Right.
head trauma. It's not their fault.
Yeah.
Then we have Sarah Lawman. On September 3rd, 1919, Sarah was attacked in her apartment. Neighbors heard a little bit of scuffle going on, came in to check on her, and when she didn't, they actually broke down the door to enter her apartment out of concern for her. And obviously, they know the Axeman is still around. So if I remember correctly, this was actually some of their motivation. Maybe she got attacked, and we got to go save her. She was found unconscious with several teeth missing, having received several wounds to the head. Once again, severe head trauma. And they discovered that the killer had entered her apartment through an open window. And once again, a bloody axe was discovered nearby on the front lawn of the apartment building they were at. And like before, thank God she recovered, but unfortunately, she could not remember anything. Then we go to the final victim, the final canonical murder, as it's known. This occurs on October 27th, 1919. Mike Pepitone, was slain in the night. And this was actually witnessed as it happened by his wife, who entered the bedroom and saw a large man with an axe fleeing the scene. And her story is not over yet. Unfortunately, I could not find her name, which is kind of fairly important. Maybe I just didn't look well enough. Um, but that is the final canonical murder.
Yeah.
All right. And that takes us to our potential suspects and potential motivations. We've covered a little bit of some of them, but just go over it. So, using the term mafia here is a bit of a misnomer because the actual organization itself would be formed a little later on. But people tend to write about this organization, the Black Hand, as if it were the mafia because it's familiar to people. But the general idea is that it was Italian operated crime organization. And given that the overwhelming number of victims were Italian in origin, speculation then naturally led to the Black Hand being involved, as maybe they weren't paying protection money or they were unable to settle debts and grievances, and they sent a hitman out to get them, which the mafia has been known to do, and the Black Hand was no different itself. So that's one people throw out there. Then we have the general as possible, unknown African American suspect. Accusations were made that the killer had to be black because of his fondness for jazz music, as well as some of the witness descriptions describing someone who had darker skin. Now, obviously, this is a very racially charged accusation, and while a possibility, there's not really a lot of evidence to back it up. Because even if something is possible, you, you really need to make assertions that can be backed up with evidence. So I don't discount this idea out of hand, but it's not in my top 5 because there's no evidence. Then, of
Yeah.
course, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, good.
Okay. Then, of course, we have this general anti-Italian sentiment that was incredibly popular at the time. If you look at this, the history of the KKK, I think second wave or whatever they refer to it as, anti-Italian, anti-Irish, anti-Jewish sentiment was sometimes even higher than anti-Black sentiment with the KKK. And because given massive Italian immigration to the Americas, people refusing to integrate with society in certain respects, and just general racism of the time. It's something that baffles me to this day, but I never pretend to understand racists. Italians weren't considered to be white. And the killer did not exclusively attack Italians, but the vast majority of the victims were Italian. And so that raises the idea in some people's minds. They had an anti-Italian bias. Now, this is more a term used here. I think there's a better way to put it, but I remember being taught the term cool down killing. And this is a general idea. I should also preface this with this is something we're still learning when it comes to the mind of serial killers, why they do what they do. Some people are process killers, some people are more crimes of opportunity. So the idea for cool down killing is that someone gets it in their head. This is how they're wired. They're going to kill a bunch of people for a time, and then they stop. BTK has been accused of being a cool down killer because he was very active and then he just stopped for decades. So the idea being for this one is that whoever perpetrated this killed a lot of people, got it out of his system, and then just lived. So that is a certain possibility there. Then we go to one of the bigger names thrown out here in Joseph Mumfre, and Mumfre. Sure, let's go with that. He himself was a known anti-Italian gang member who was known for roughing up Italians, especially like he did it to a lot of people, but he had a real hate on, shall we say, for Italians. He himself was found shot a year later in December 1920 by Mrs. Pepitone, the wife of victim Mike Pepitone, because she said later on that she remembered as she took time to process things as him being the one to actually murder her husband. Now, he himself was known to extort immigrants, especially Italian immigrants, and was not well liked in the community for his actions as a result. So, this has led many people to name him their number one. Take it away, Jeff.
I think most of these are just byproducts of the time. Knowing a fair bit of the background into the Black Hand and the mafia and all of that, um, this in no way, shape, or form fits that bill. There's nothing about this that fits what the MO would be of that organization. Um, unknown African American suspect is just pure unadulterated racism. Um, and yeah, I mean, the idea is, you could very easily take a look at something like this and say, okay, maybe they are connected by their heritage and all of that. And if there was connective tissue, then I could see that world as that being the connective tissue. But this still seems like somebody that, assuming it was all done by the same person, and assuming that also includes the letter, that this is just somebody looking to spread chaos and positioning themselves in a way that they could be just anybody would mean that they would be positioning themselves as somebody who had a sentiment against one group of people or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. And actually, I just happened to think of something I forgot to write down. There is another hypothesis out there that I find pretty interesting, if true, and that being an idea of this person not being someone who is native to the city, but would become temporarily a native of the city via being a hobo. And that term originates 19th century first, so that would be around in the nomenclature. It got way more popular, obviously, during the Depression when more people did it. But what a lot of the times what hobos would do is they would go from city to city, hopping on trains, trying to find some place with a job. And one reason people give for an explanation of why there's such a long waiting period between one murder to the next is that whoever this person was working in New Orleans for a little bit, hopped on a train, went elsewhere. Maybe they committed murders there, and then came back later on. Um, I don't know if I buy that, but it's a cool idea, if nothing else.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly possible. It's not outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah. Now, through looking through all these, I've kind of made my allegiances known, but it could be the mafia. Oh, sorry, the Black Hand of the time. Some people even thrown the KKK out there too. It could also be there. They were extremely active at this time, getting a resurgence, as it
Yeah.
were, um, and would be even more successful in the coming years until eventually most of them got taken down. Um, so, like, I could see it, but the way these people are being killed, if you were trying to send a message, I think you would try and make it a little clearer. Like, no one around
Yeah.
these cases seemed to have said that they were in debt to the mob, or that message they left. It's obviously talking about this. I'm not in it to win it for that one. The unknown African American suspect, like I said, it's possible, but plenty of things are possible. Like, you're going to need to come with me a little further down the line to get me to say yes, this is exactly that, because you're just saying it based off of hearsay or bad eyewitness
Right.
testimony or racial prejudice at a time. More
Yeah.
than likely, anti-Italian sentiment, that makes sense to me. As far as people saw them as leeches stealing jobs from good old honest working Americans. So someone motivated by that, I actually think that is a reason for why it happened, and that's why I tend to go with Joseph Mumfree. If you have to put a name to the face of this nebulous killer, I'm going there because of who he is, because of his motivations. The idea being of he had that much of a hatred for the Italian people. Let me go and the crime of opportunity, maybe, or maybe he selectively went after people. Maybe he really hated Italian grocers. I don't know. And he would go after them specifically. So, what's your final conclusion there, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I could see a world where that's the case. I don't think it's an organization. I think if it is anything like that, if it is motivated killing outside of just for the name or for the sake of chaos, um, then I would say it's motivated by somebody that is just trying to target people of that particular ethnicity.
Yeah. All right. So, after that, what do you believe, dear listeners and viewers? Who is the Axeman of New Orleans? Was it one of the suspects listed tonight or someone completely different? We didn't touch everything that history and folklore have on the subject tonight, so let us know in the comments below if there's something you'd like us to do a follow up on. And in the description below, you can find the sources used for tonight's program, if I actually remember to put them there. So I don't know. I'm a Ron Burgundy, and it's really hard right now. So next time, we'll be moving on to our next category, that, of course, being the final one of ufology. And this was a neck to neck race in the Facebook group, winning by a total of one vote because your vote matters. We're going to be doing the mysterious Foo Fighters of World War II and whether or not aliens or Nazis or what have you were behind their appearances. So, thank you guys for all that you do. We really enjoy working with you. Please feel free to share this episode with anyone. This will also be found later on in podcast form. So, you can subscribe to us there. You can subscribe to Systematic Geekology. So, until next time, see ya.